I wanted to get into some, a little bit of the oil industry, basically, and there's a science hook for this, and that science hook is that Greenland's melt season. Now, the big worry, the big concern right now for a lot of scientists, or one of many actually. I mean, you've got Michael Mann talking about he's written a couple of good pieces on this recently. James Hansen just published a piece talking about how, the big thing that we're going to have to worry about basically is not so much just sea level rise. That's going to happen. But the other thing that we've got to worry about is superstorms capable of moving 10,000-ton boulders around on land, out of the ocean into the land. In other words, like Superstorm Sandy, or like that typhoon that wiped out parts of the Philippines. I mean, we're now getting storms. We had a tornado that was a mile wide that went through the central part of the United States last summer. These are storms that, used to happen maybe once every 100 years when you get this really weird coincidental occurrence of different weather conditions and things, that it all hit at once, the perfect storm sort of thing. Which is why, such things are referred to as perfect storms. Well, you no longer need a perfect storm. Now these are the new normal. And Hansen is suggesting they're going to get a hell of a lot worse. Well, this is Brian Kahn publishing over at Climate Central. To say the 2016 Greenland melt season is off to the races is an understatement. Warm, wet conditions rapidly kicked off the melt season this weekend, more than a month and a half ahead of schedule. It has easily set a record for the earliest melt season onset and marks the first time it's begun in April. This is the first time ever that Greenland started melting this early. Little to no melt through winter is the norm, as sub-zero temperatures keep Greenland's massive ice sheet, on ice. Warm weather usually kicks off in late May or early June. But this year is a little different. Record warm temperatures coupled with heavy rain mostly sparked 12% of the ice sheet to go into meltdown mode. Almost all of that melt is currently centered around southwest Greenland, which would be where the prevailing winds are coming from, off the great conveyor belt, off the Atlantic, where the warm water in the Atlantic. And according to Polar Portal, which monitors all things ice related in the Arctic, melt season kicks off when 10% of the ice sheet experiences surface melt. The previous record for the earliest start was 6 years ago on May 5th. It has never, ever before happened in April. Today is April 14th. This article was published on April 16th. These observations were done a day or two before that. This April kickoff, he writes, Brian Kahn writes, is so bizarrely early. Scientists who study the ice sheet checked their analysis to make sure something wasn't amiss before making the announcement. Peter Langen, a climate scientist at the Denmark Meteorological Institute, said we had to check our models to make sure that they were still working properly. But they are. And in fact, in Kangerlussuaq, a small village in southwest Greenland, April set an all-time record for that location of 64.4 degrees Fahrenheit on Monday. That's pretty amazing. Jason Box is tweeting about this. Jason Box is in our movie Last Hours. You could go to YouTube. You can see it. Just plug in my name in Last Hours or Leonardo DiCaprio's name in Last Hours. So here we have our environment, our climate melting down, our planet turning hostile towards us. And it's because of the activities, by and large, of one industry. Now, it's a multifaceted industry, but it's basically one industry, and that's the fossil fuel industry. Coal, oil, gas. Back in 1946, there's just an absolutely brilliant piece over at commondreams.org. And Common Dreams, it does not say who wrote this. I'm sorry. But in any case, in 1946, a group of industry executives, now keep in mind, 1946, this is even before I was born, and I'm an old fart. 1946, they formed a panel, this is a bunch of fossil fuel executives, called the Smoke and Fumes Committee. But the Center for International Environmental Law, CIEL, writes, and I quote, "But the research was not meant to be a public service. Rather, it was used by the committee to promote public skepticism of environmental science and environmental regulations the industry considered hasty, costly, and potentially unnecessary." You get this in 1946. By the mid-1950s, at the very latest, climate change was one of those issues. Initially, the Smoke and Fumes Committee of the fossil fuel industry executives was looking at things like asthma and cancer. But by the 1950s, they realized climate change was part of this. There was a research paper that was presented to the American Petroleum Institute, the API, the trade association for the fossil fuel industry, or at least for the oil part of it, by Stanford Research Institute in 1968. This is how long these guys have known this stuff. This report, which was given to the American Petroleum Institute in 1968, just been released, says, and I quote, "Significant temperature changes are almost certain to occur by the year 2000, and these could bring about climate change. If the Earth's temperature increases significantly," keep in mind, this was 1968. If the Earth's temperature increases significantly, a number of events might be expected to occur, including the melting of the Antarctic ice cap, a rise in sea levels, warming of the oceans, and an increase in photosynthesis. There seems to be no doubt that the potential damage to our environment could be severe. So what did these people know? When did they know it? And what did they do about it? What they knew in the 1950s and 60s was that climate change was a very real probability as an outcome of burning more fossil fuels. They knew this. They knew it would be destructive. Okay, they knew it, and they knew it then. Now, what did they do about it? Well, they started, funding climate denial think tanks. They started lobbying members of Congress. They started putting out, disinformation. Over at the Huffington Post, the associate editor of HuffPo Hawaii writes, in 1968, a pair of scientists, this is basically the same story, wrote a report for the American Petroleum Institute. They warned man is now engaged in a vast geophysical experiment with his environment, the Earth, one that may be the cause of serious worldwide environmental changes. This was 1968. We've seen this movie before. We saw this with the tobacco industry, which kills 500,000 Americans every year. Right up until 1998, as I recall, was the year I think the tobacco settlement was happened. They were merrily going along their way, saying, "Oh, there's no no definite, no clear correlation, no proven scientific link between our product, between cigarettes and cancer. You can't prove that nicotine is addictive." You had the 5, 6, 7, I forget the number of the CEOs of the tobacco industry testify before Congress. They all lied under oath. No consequences. They're rich white guys, but they all lied under oath. By the way, isn't that what they got Bill Clinton for? They impeached him for lying under oath. In any case, these guys were billionaire or multimillionaire, executives in the tobacco industry. So we've seen this with the tobacco industry. We've seen this with the pesticide industry. We're seeing this now with the herbicide and the fungicide industry. I got stories about that to share with you as we continue through this program. We've seen this before. Industry doesn't give a rat's ass about anything except the bottom line. And it's gotten a whole lot worse since Reagan changed the tax code so that CEOs are heavily incentivized to buy back, to have their corporation buy back their stock, to jack up their own executive compensation.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We now have this it's a toxic system, as Jimmy Carter called it, an oligarchy. We'll be back. To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.